Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. Doobie-doobie-doo. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati.
All right. Happy Monday, guys. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I have Lee Campus here tonight. He's a commentator and a comedian. Lee, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, I got to tell you.
This neo-McCarthyism, this censorship thing is it's no joke.
So why don't we start with you explaining to everyone what happened a couple days ago with RT? Like, how did you find out that they were going to shut RT down? And was there any type of communication that you received from RT ahead of time?
Sure. For those who aren't familiar with me, I hosted a TV show called Redacted Tonight for 8 years, 375 episodes. If you count my interview show, over 500 episodes. And it's a comedy and news, definitely from the left wing, anti-war, anti-imperialist. But despite the fact that was on RT America, which is funded by the Russian government, I am an American in America covering American news, and I was never told what to say, was never censored, was never told not to say anything. I wrote all my own words, unlike pretty much every other comedy news show on the planet that has teams of writers, producers. I wrote everything I said. So an immense amount of freedom, kind of unheard of. And RT America was really the only network on television, on actual TV across America, where I could do exactly that, precisely that. And that's why I was there. It's also why other people were there, like Chris Hedges and Jesse Ventura, etc. Anyway, coming up in a few days, it'll be 2 weeks ago, we were told, on Wednesday, everything seemed like it was going fine. On Wednesday, we were told, nothing will go to air that day. And then they said they'd have more for us Thursday. We come into a staff meeting Thursday, and they say that everything's over. Grab your stuff. See you later. There was no explanation given. For the most part, the mainstream media completely ignored it. There's been a few articles, but in terms of, the 24/7 wallpaper coverage of CNN, et cetera, there's basically been zero coverage. No defense from fellow journalists, no defense for the most part, at least in the mainstream, no defense from so many other networks that could easily be next in this purging of dissent, purging of dissident views, purging of anything that's adversarial to the U.S. war machine. And in the little few articles that are out there, they act like, RT America just decided to shut down because they lost one of their distributors. But to me, that rings completely hollow. They could have kept running for many reasons. They had other platforms. They were big online. So there's plenty of people still seeing their content. They had plenty of funding, at least for several months, if not a year. And they, had plenty of staff. Even if they needed to cut back a little to only some of the shows, they could have done that, which they did not. And there was also no mumblings of them ever coming back. It was very clear that it was over.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too. When I spoke to Tara Reid last week, I was wondering that too. Like, would they ever come back? And what was really weird too is that when they announced that RT America was shutting down, for a couple of days, they were still on YouTube. And then now I see that's no longer the case as well.
Yeah, which kind of has a whole other level of like dystopian Orwellian, holy God, are we really at this point kind of feeling to it? That all of the back episodes for years, I was there 8 years, but it goes back farther than that. Everything is banned now. If you go to Redacted Tonight's YouTube page, you just see a thing that says banned in your country. And as far as I've heard, that pretty much goes for every country now. And it is kind of a amazing like erasure of history of the content that was there. And on top of that, within the span of about 2 days, the show was my show was canceled, all the pack videos deleted, and my personal podcast Moment of Clarity deleted off Spotify. And so this all happened within the span of a few days, which also shows like cross coordination of corporations like Spotify, corporations like YouTube, which is owned by Google, and our federal government. They clearly were all coordinating in some manner to make sure this all happened fairly simultaneously, which is, I mean, honestly, it should be incredibly disturbing to anyone who thinks we should have even a modicum of freedom of press, freedom of speech on these platforms. And you don't have to agree with anything I say. I happen to be anti-war, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist. And I made it clear on my videos that I was opposed to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but I also am not a child, and I can talk about the context of why this is happening, the expansion in NATO, the U.S.-backed coup of 2014, etc. So unless you're a child and you can't hear context, I don't think that should be a problem. But again, you don't have to agree with anything I've ever said to understand how dangerous and just, I mean, really backwards facing this is.
Yeah, and it's also The Hill, which is on the corporate algorithm. They were suspended about a week ago on YouTube for words that they actually didn't even say. It was a video that they were playing from Fox News of Trump speaking, and they were suspended because of the information that came from Fox News. And they didn't even say those words. I mean, they're back up and running now, but I just saw earlier today, which I'll be talking about this tomorrow, Kim Iverson, now her channel just received a suspension. So yeah, this isn't something that we should just, I guess, bat our eye at. Like, this is really serious. And a lot of people, I think we're going to see more people starting to get these suspensions or taken down. I don't know if you saw this as well, but I saw Abby Martin. All of her videos are gone.
Yep, all of her back episodes of Breaking the Set, which was an amazing and kind of groundbreaking show that lasted for 3 years. Those are all banned as well. And yeah, I mean, like you said, I wonder whether people understand what you mean by the corporate algorithm. It speaks to how this has been going on for a while. There are channels and YouTube channels that are connected to kind of corporate America that receive favorable treatment in a very large way. This is why you don't really see suspensions of Fox News YouTube videos, despite how egregious some things may be coming out of Fox News or coming out of CNN or MSNBC. They never seem to be impacted by any of this. And you know, it was weird for The Hill to actually have that happen because they, for the most part, are given that kind of exemption of, oh, you're one of the, you know, good children of corporate America, so you don't have to worry about these type of suspensions and banning that we are perpetrating against other channels. And this is not just YouTube, obviously. This is ongoing for several years now. My Facebook page, which used to be my biggest platform, essentially became shadow banned around 2016. I was gaining 5,000 followers a week. I had 330,000 followers, and all of a sudden I gained 0. And most of my posts are seen by something like 0.1% of my followers. So you spend years building up these platforms, building up a voice for your what it is you do as a content creator, and then to mix my metaphors, the carpet is pulled out from under you and the sand is eroded out from under you by a massive wave of censorship, some of it clear, a banner that says banned in your country, but much of it not clear, much of it quietly done. There's no one, I can't point to any warning label as to why my Facebook page was shadow banned, but it's very evident that it happened.
100%. And I want to get your opinion on this because I don't think anyone should be removed. I don't think anyone should be deplatformed, whether I agree with what they say or not. But I have to ask, Joe Rogan, Spotify stood by him. which I totally understand. But at the same time, they remove you and they remove Tara Reid. So does that come across as kind of like hypocritical to you?
Of course, wildly hypocritical. And I don't think Joe Rogan should have been removed, but I mean, which he hasn't. Actually, that's one of the things I point to as kind of hilarious is that like a lot of people are like, I'm talking about comedians because I'm a comedian who kind of does news the way Joe Rogan's a comedian who kind of does some news, and people go, oh, well, Joe Rogan's been, canceled, or Dave Chappelle's been canceled. And I'm like, no, they haven't. They're on platforms with like the largest platforms in the world, getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars. They have not been canceled. I, on the other hand, literally have had my show, my channel, all my old videos all deleted. So it's funny that people act like the people who haven't been canceled have been canceled. And then, there's a blip on the radar when my entire show and online existence has been deleted. By the way, if people are wondering, what my plan is, I have created patreon.com/Lee Camp. If I get enough members, there's a chance I could create something that at least has a bit of the feel of Redacted Tonight. It will never be the same thing. And it will never be in a big, giant news studio, but it hopefully will fill some of the hole in the airwaves and the hole in my heart.
Oh my gosh. I'm also curious about this as well. Um to me, I looked at this as I'm looking at it from economical perspective. I saw this as all of these people just lost their job. And some people have families that they have to take
Yep.
care of. Some people have other projects on the side, but not necessarily everyone. Um, did RT issue any type of severance to any of you, or?
Yeah, in their announcement they said we get 2 months severance, and I don't actually know if that's the normal, or maybe 3 months is, I don't know, but it's better than nothing for it, because there was 100 some employees, and that was just in the DC office. They had bureaus in New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and it all shuttered in a day,
Mhm.
despite the fact that they've been going for something like 15 years, and I'd been there for 8 years. And it's really sad to see all of that just wiped away in a single day, clearly due to U.S. sanctions. And meanwhile, this is being celebrated by much of the press, for the ones that even mention it. And not just the press, but liberals in general are just celebrating this type of censorship. And they don't seem to understand or care that, well, who gets censored first? Yeah, first, kind of the test balloon was Alex Jones, who, I find him pretty repulsive. But at the time, I said, this isn't just going to be Alex Jones. This will be the new normal. This will be how it goes going forward. And sure enough, a couple of years after him, we saw the purging of 800 Facebook pages, the deletion all in one day of things like Free Thought Project, Police the Police, a police brutality awareness site, antiwar.com, anti-media. They all deleted in one day, and their editors suspended permanently on Twitter simultaneously, meaning that there is, again, coordination between two massive corporate entities, some of the biggest tech companies in the world, despite the fact they're supposed to be adversaries. Twitter and Facebook are not supposed to be working together, what we're told, and yet clearly there is some sort of coordination as to who needs to be deleted from our online airwaves.
Speaking of coordination, I noticed that the White House has reached out to TikTok influencers to get them to do talking points about Ukraine and Russia. And I want to get your opinion on that, because I feel like this is very dangerous because they're reaching a lot of young people. And I see young people like repeating these talking points, not knowing the true history, not knowing both sides of the story, because the influencers on TikTok are getting across to them and are reaching them. And I want to get your opinion about that. And how do you think, because this is something that's come up a couple of times, people have contacted me and said, you guys need to reach the younger people. How do you think we, like as commentators, can reach that group, the group that maybe not on YouTube, but reach like the college kids or the high school students? So I want to get your opinion on that.
Well, I do view the White House coordinating TikTok talking points to have some alliteration there. Uh, I find it dangerous, but also at the same time, I think most of the time they don't have to do that because the propaganda, the messaging is actually put in people's heads via our media. So most of the time, the White House doesn't actually have to sit down TikTokers and say, "Here are the things we've made up for you to say about what's going on right now." Most of the time, that's done just for them by CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, etc., PBS, NBC. That's done for them. And that's really, I'd say, that the far more troublesome thing is just all the people buying the garbage coming out of your mainstream media, coming out of the New York Times, the Washington Post. These are outlets that we have proven time and again have lied us into war. And right now they're lying us into the largest Cold War we've seen in decades. And Cold War is not free of fatalities and pain. Cold War and economic war, which is a key part of Cold War, kills tens of thousands. 100,000 have died in Venezuela alone from our recent economic war on them. So right now they're manufacturing consent for a massive Cold War against Russia, the likes of which we haven't seen since, I don't know, the 1970s and 80s. And it really is disgusting. And that is the way they, for the most part, get, TikTok and YouTubers and everybody else in line, is just the propaganda that's coming out on those levels. Now, to be clear, as I've said here and everywhere else, I'm opposed to Putin's invasion, but that doesn't mean you need to cover your ears and go every time someone tries to tell you the context of this situation, the expansion of NATO over many years. NATO is a military alliance. The putting of missiles and Nazis on the Russian border, Nazis with actual swastikas on their helmets and uniforms. These are not secret Nazis. These are full frontal, in-your-face Nazis. And the Russians lost 25 million people fighting Nazis in World War II. We lost 400,000. So I guess the Russians have a bit of a sore spot when it comes to funding and arming Nazis on their border. So there's a lot of context here that I think is incredibly important, and your mainstream media doesn't want to give you any of it, and in fact wants to purge all of those who actually give it from the national discussion.
Someone brought up this recommendation, and you being a comedian, you've been on tour, you've been out on the road, and I'm curious what you think about this idea. Someone reached out to us and said that they think that some of us in independent or left independent media need to do a college tour, that we need to go to different colleges and say the same thing that we're saying like on our platforms, but to an audience. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I think that's cool and fun. Yeah, I toured colleges for years. Played 600 colleges, I think, in 5 years when I was in my 20s. But I will say this, that for the most part, colleges do not, with some obvious exceptions, but for the most part, they do not want to bring onto campus actual left-wing speakers. They'll bring the kind of standard liberal people, like the Rachel Maddow or something that pretends to be left-wing while supporting war, at every turn. So they'll bring those type of people, but will they bring actual leftists, actual people that actually criticize capitalism? There are a couple of universities, a few universities that I think that's true, but for the most part, that's not really going to happen. Now, you can book a tour of colleges that doesn't go through the university system, where you just kind of play facilities or whatever, play events in that town, and see if you can attract the college kids to those type of shows. So yeah, I mean, I think it's cool. I don't know that it will have the type of change that people are imagining, because there's a lot of hurdles to actually getting hundreds, or thousands of college students out to hear people speak, especially with views that are outside of their mainstream media. Because like myself, I can actually relate to this. When I was in college, I was still what I viewed as left wing, but I thought it was, the Democrats were the left wing.
Nope.
I didn't really understand that that was kind of the allowable corporate talking points, and there was something outside of the Democratic Party, the billionaires that rule the Democratic Party. So, and I think that's how most college students are in America. You know, they've been carefully indoctrinated that way, and it's tough to get them to show up to something that's beyond that's little Overton window.
That's a good point. I noticed we always had to have free food. We always had to have
That'll
food
help. That'll help a lot.
to get them to come to things. Someone brought up this question, and this is a good point. Was there anywhere that shows were archived? So, do you know if any of your shows from RT were backed up?
So I do know that Odyssey, Odyssee, is a site that apparently backed up most or a lot of the shows. I think you might have had to request that they do it. So for shows that didn't request, it's possible that's not true. But I know that for my show, it is supposedly all on Odyssey, I think, .com. I don't know how easy it is to search, how easy it is to find. I haven't really researched that. Then we put some of the Redacted Tonight stuff on my Rockfin, ROKFIN.com/Lee Camp, but not that much of it. And then the last thing is, for the moment, I still have access. I assume they'll shut it off soon, but to the back end of the Redacted Tonight YouTube page. So I'm trying to get as much of the content as I can while there's still time, but I don't know how long that'll last. And then, of course, once I have that content, it's a question of where do I put it up next, and hopefully I can find a way to start putting up those back episodes.
That's a good point. I'm wondering about this as well. Now, this is coming from Jordan Sheraton. He came up with this idea. He actually recommended that there is one network for left independent media, and everybody can still do their respective, like YouTube, Rockfin shows, but one network for left independent media that is not on YouTube. And I thought about this recently because someone informed me and I didn't realize this. I haven't watched David Pakman in a long time and he's in my state. But someone told me that David Pakman also has a show on Roku. And I know like they would never let us go on cable. They would never. But what do you think about that idea? Like if there was one big left network that was not on YouTube and everybody from left independent media was on that network?
Yeah, no, I in general, I like the idea of having a place that independent, left-wing material is. I've a little bit have tried to create that recently, a website, radindiemedia.com, RADINDIE media.com, with Eleanor Goldfield, and it aggregates a bunch of the best content on the left every day. We didn't intend it as some big venture. It's not intended to make money. There's no ads. There's no corporate sponsors. It was just intended as kind of a digital front page for people who wanted actual left-wing independent media. And then the kind of second reason to have it was exactly this, so that when people are deleted from their platforms, if you're going to Rad Indie Media, you're still seeing their work and they're not just disappeared like black bagged in the night. So that's why we created it. We haven't had a lot of time to focus on it, but it does, because it is automatic and aggregates, it does have new stuff every single day. And all of the clicks go straight through to the content. So it's not trying to keep people on our site because it's not, again, trying to make money. So it just channels that straight to to the actual sites of the content creators. And, I don't know if someone can do it better or if someone were to have an advertising budget and create something like that and be able to spend $1 million on letting people know about it, maybe it could be more of a game changer. But I do think that in general, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I've been trying to encourage more people to go over to Rockfin and watch Rockfin. I don't know what your experience has been like on Rockfin, but for whatever reason, some of my viewers say we don't like the platform, so they always come back to YouTube. What do you think about Rockfin? Do you think that could be a better place for people to go, or do you think that people are just so conditioned to YouTube?
I mean, I think you have to build up the alternatives while you continue to use the massive platforms, because I don't think people should just delete necessarily their, delete YouTube or Twitter or anything, because they are so massive. I mean, Facebook is like a second internet, if you look at the sheer number of people that use it, and Instagram, which it owns. So it would be a pity for activists to say, oh, okay, we're all going over to this site that almost no one uses, and I'm deleting the platforms that everyone uses, and now we can be over there and we can be alone in our little filter bubble. So I think you have to build up the alternatives while continuing to use the tools that are at our disposal. So I still use Twitter a bunch, even though it's had many of its own problems and own censorship and deleting accounts. And I'm trying to build up this patreon.com/Lee Camp to try and create a new something like Redacted Tonight. But I also know that Patreon has had its issues. I know that it's deleted some people for kind of no reason, as far as I know. So yeah, there's issues there too. So yeah, I definitely think the alternatives have to be built up. Rockfin is one of them. Hopefully in not too long, Panquake will launch, and that will be a kind of uncensorable blockchain alternative to a lot of this. Yeah, the alternatives are important, and it does seem like they're growing. I hear more people talking about alternatives rather than just saying the big three platforms.
Have you looked at Rumble? Have you had a chance to look at Rumble yet?
I just looked at it a little today and yesterday, and it definitely seems like a possibility. I will say that there's no, while it is anti-censorship, there's no promise that it couldn't be sold to someone or something like that. So there's always going to be a question mark when it's a corporate entity looking for profit. It could be taken over by a new board or whatever, and change its paradigm fairly easily, unless it's account, on the decentralized on the blockchain, etc. So there's some questions there, but it does seem like there could be something with Rumble and Locals as the site that they own. So yeah, maybe in the future.
I want to get your opinion about the Biden administration. This is going to be a touchy subject.
Big fan, huge fan, love it.
I want to get your opinion about this. I have been telling people, stop voting for the duopoly. If you're going to vote third party or for independent candidates. Some people don't like that message. They're like, well, no, you shouldn't tell people that. They need to vote for viable options. And my argument is, look at what the Democratic Party is doing. Look at how many times they tell us they don't have money to do things for the American people. They can't give everybody health care because Joe Biden said it's too expensive. We don't have the money. Yet they just gave trillions of dollars to people in Ukraine. We watch them spend money in the ways that, fits military industrial complex and pleases donors, but not for the American people. And I feel like this is a really good time, especially with the pandemic. A lot of people have been laid off. Unemployment rates are high. This would be the time to really turn the tide, to convince people, listen, this two-party system is not working. We need to do something different. But I also think we need to add direct action with that as well. We need to get people out in the streets. We have to put pressure on them. What do you think is going to happen come 2024? Do you think that once again, people are going to push people to vote blue no matter who?
Yep.
And if that does happen, I'm thinking back to Hillary and Jill Stein, and I'm thinking back to all of these independent media was doing this as well, telling viewers, vote for Hillary because you don't want Trump. Meanwhile, Jill Stein was on the ballot in 48 states. Why weren't we telling people to vote for Jill Stein, or why weren't they telling people that? So I want to get your opinion about this. If that message comes up again in 2024, vote blue no matter who, how do you feel about people trying to break that cycle and voting for third party or independent candidates? And do you think it could work?
Well, in order to answer this, I need to ask you a question. I can curse on here, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a fucking catastrophe, and it's designed this way. And they will always say it's the most important election we've ever seen in our lifetime, and we'll hear that every year. And before I even get into just Biden, etc., or whatever, Clinton, I think that you'd have to premise these conversations with the amount of time that you or anyone, any activist, anybody watching this, anyone who cares about creating change in this world should spend on discussing the federal elections should be max 5% of their time. 5% of their political discussion. It should be a tiny amount, probably less, but I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. And the reason is we actually, for the, studies have shown, for the most part, cannot create change on the federal level. This system, according to a large 2014 Princeton study, is an oligarchy. It is ruled by a tiny elite business class. When the American people want something to happen, like healthcare, it does not happen at all unless it aligns with corporate interests. So even with the example of Obamacare, they had to make sure that aligned with corporate interests to get anything done. So nothing, like zero, that the American people want that doesn't align with corporate interests will ever get done. This is an oligarchy, and we need to stop thinking that we have some kind of grand ability to alter the mind of these sociopaths. It is just a tiny modicum of influence that we ever have over any of them, because they're not getting their money from us. That's how they get reelected. The candidate who spends the most money wins 90% of the time in the House and 80% of the time in the Senate. And guess what? The two candidates who spend the most money, meaning millions upon millions of dollars, they win 100% of the time. 100% of the time, the two candidates who spend the most will win the election. So there is no reason for us to sit here and spend such a breath to years of our time. Even in Britain, where it's also rigged, and corrupt, they spend 3 months, 4 months on their election. We spend 3 years preparing for the presidential election. And for the most part, it serves the purpose of distracting everybody from our reality, distracting us from real action, real change, distracting us from the exact on-the-ground activism that you were just talking about. And instead, we're just debating over whether you should vote for Biden and Trump. And for the most part, it does not matter. Joe Biden, as you know, I was ranting and railing going into the election. I would explain how horrific Trump is, and then I would talk about how horrific Joe Biden is. Joe Biden is, in many ways, the Democrats are able to create the worst policies because it's done under the guise of not being the Republicans, of not being right wing. I mean, if you look at the prison industrial complex with Biden have craft, the largest in the world, we are the largest prison state in the world, both per capita and per number. That's thanks to Joe Biden and a few others. If you look at the Patriot Act that has gutted Americans' rights, that's thanks to Joe Biden and a few others. If you look at so many things, Joe Biden was there cheerleading for war, into every war we've been thrown into the latest estimates are 6 million people have died in our wars on terror across the past 20 years. 6 million, 1 million direct deaths and 5 million indirect deaths. And that's thanks to Joe Biden and his friends. And so actually, if you look at this, the Democrats are able to get often worse things done than the Republicans because people think it's liberal. They think it's nice and squishy and left wing or something. So I don't see any kind of positive change coming from these sociopaths. And we have a unique system in that it really does impressively allow the sociopaths to rise to the top. They say the cream rises to the top. It's the sociopaths that are the cream, apparently, because they rise to the top because you have to be a sociopath to put money over all else. And you have to put money over all else to be able to do what corporate America wants and get into those seats because the money wins 100% of the time. So I'm not saying don't discuss who you want to win a Senate seat or something, but honestly, 5% of your political discussion should ever have to do with that. The real change, the actual change that could change our world, that could impact people for the positive, that's happening on the ground. That is people fighting pipelines that actually are getting stopped. Things like the Keystone Pipeline, things like the 80 million acres of drilling leases that Biden approved in the Gulf of Mexico that have been overturned by the courts. It's happening in the courts a little bit, and it's happening a lot by activists. They slow down these pipelines. They make it not profitable for the company to continue to go through with them. And that's where real change is happening. Mutual aid across this country. Millions of people have been helped by mutual aid hubs around this country during this pandemic, giving out groceries and medical aid to people. That is real help and real change. And the truth is the federal government is just bought and owned.
Thank you so much for saying that. I was saying, recently there was a stream called Seize the House, and it was Marianne Williamson and Katie Halper and Bree and Juliana, I want to say is her name. and it was for progressive candidates that are running for Congress. And I think, there was a big awakening, I think, for them because of the viewers' response. And I think people are just at a different place now, like in this country, especially after the pandemic. And my big question that I've had for a long time is, okay, we put these candidates through, but they're going into a party that is owned by Wall Street. And nobody has come to me with any kind of plan to get the money out. And I feel like that is the golden question. Like,
Yeah.
how are you going to get the money out when they're attached to Wall Street?
Yeah, I spent a long time on money out efforts, and I still support them, but I've come to largely believe that you can't get the money out because the system is the money. The system is owned by these corporate interests that are more powerful than most governments. I mean, corporate interests like Goldman Sachs, et cetera, are, they take in and deal with more money than most countries. And like, you could make some small change maybe in the financial system of American elections, but I don't think it would stay for long. My term, which so far I haven't heard anyone else claim they came up with it, so I'm going to take credit, is the gravity of capitalism. It's not that you can't, people like to talk about unfettered capitalism. It's not that you can't fetter some level of capitalism a little bit, but the gravity of it is always going to be towards the profit. It's going to be towards the extraction that results in the profit. It's going to be towards the exploitation of workers that results in the profit. And so that gravity can take a long time. It can take a long time for a galaxy to be sucked into a black hole, but it happens eventually. And so the gravity of capitalism will be towards the capital owning the system. And you just slowly get there. Some countries are slowing it down a little better than us. We're probably the worst on this scale, but they're all slowly getting there. And to me, that is the gravity you're fighting against. So you've got to break free of the system.
Well said. This just came through. Natalie just said Jimmy Dore's stream went down abruptly on YouTube and Rumble. Can't wait for Pancake. Speaking of censorship, Natalie, can you put in the chat and tell me what was he talking about? I'm curious. Oh boy, he's about to hit 1 million subs too, so there's that as well. But one of the things that I'm trying to get people to do, and we're going to focus on this the following weekend, I'm doing a panel for ballot initiatives, because a lot of people don't even know that it exists, that they live in a state that has ballot initiatives. So we've actually gotten a lot done here in Massachusetts through ballot initiatives. That's how we legalized marijuana here. We did get ranked choice voting on the ballot. That didn't pass. And I think that's because most people I talked to said they didn't understand the question.
Right. I'm actually glad you brought up ballot issues, because something I failed to say in my little rant there is that I think you can have more impact, far more impact in local elections, some degree state elections. They tend to be less rigged by the money than federal, and so I actually think ballot initiative. I always tell people to vote. I've never said don't vote, but you should just not spend a lot of your time wasted in terms of activism and creating change on voting. But locally, you can have far more of an impact. So yeah, ballot initiatives can be important. And we've seen legalization or at least decriminalization of many drugs across the country, to help decrease the prison industrial complex, among other things. It can be powerful.
Awesome. All right, Lee, before you go, I have one more question for you. What advice would you give to someone who's coming into this space new, or wants to come into this space and do independent media in reference to the censorship?
Just don't say things that are anti-imperialist. Then you should be good. Just like talk about your cat and stuff, and then no one ever censors you. I think that honestly, for one thing, have redundancies, have multiple platforms. I mean, the reason I think I'm still here and people are joining my Patreon, luckily, is because I still have a Twitter. I have a bit of a remaining Facebook. I had a second YouTube channel, YouTube Moment of Clarity, that is still there for the moment. It's not very big, but it's still there. have these redundancies in place. I have a website, leecamp.com, because they will shut you down, they will suppress you, and hopefully at least your real fans will go and find those other platforms that are still functioning. So I think that's part of it is redundancies. Part of it is build up the platforms that won't do this, that are showing that they aren't censoring, that they aren't stopping people's thoughts and discussion. And another one is it takes a lot of work, but at the end of the day, you're probably doing it because you're passionate about it. It's not an easy way to make a living, or a sure way to make a living or to have an influence. But if you're really passionate about it, really devote yourself to it, you can get there eventually.
Awesome. Well said. Everyone, please donate to Lee's Patreon. Definitely check that out. Lee, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
See ya.
See ya.
All right, guys. Yes, thank you so much for letting me know that with Jimmy, it appears it might have been tech issues. Okay, so thank you so much for letting me know that, guys. That's good to hear. Well, not good to hear, but better than what we thought it was. Okay, so I want to give a huge shout out to patrons. Thank you so much for this tip on Rockfin, Roger Meadows. Lee, are you in a BI state? Oh, sorry, Roger. I just saw that. I'm so sorry. I want to say, why do I want to think that Lee's in New York? I had to double check that, Roger, but I want to say that he's in New York for some reason. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Boop, 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 boop. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate all your support. Huge shout out to 2 new patrons, Brent Hudgens and Peter Ione. I believe that's how you pronounce your last name. That's a pretty cool name, actually. Ione. Thank you guys so much. If you want to be a Sabby patron, I have 4 categories: members, Sabby, Sabsters, and Ultimate. Check that out if you want to help support the show. And I think someone just said Lee is in DC. Oh, that was from Colin, but I just lost you, Colin. Where'd you go? Where did that happen? Oh, Derek, Lee is in DC. Okay, so never mind then. We can't do it there. But the idea with ballot initiatives is that you get issues on the ballot pass in BI states, and then that puts pressure on the states that surround those states. And that's worked here in Massachusetts. It's worked in other places as well. And I think that's the direction we need to pay more attention to. So I do have a ballot initiative panel that is coming up, not this weekend, but the following weekend. Commentators that live in BI states will be on, and we're going to have that discussion. And I think it'll be an interesting discussion. And we're also going to talk about how you can do it, how you can get BI started, because that's the first question. Like, how do I even do this? Right. So we'll get to that as well. All right, guys, what are we talking about tonight? I have 2 pretty interesting stories and excited to get into this. So Chris Hedges calls out prisons. So Chris Hedges just had a recent interview, and he's talking about the prison system and comparing it to being on the battlefield. And there was a part in that conversation that I do want to highlight and talk about tonight. And we're also going to discuss Congress overturns legalization. If you live in DC, you are not going to be happy about this. And of course, Lee Camp joined. So Lee Camp was just here. So I want to go ahead and get into that Chris Hedges story. So let's go ahead and get that started. So Chris Hedges, I just realized I don't have this window running. Connect. All right, there we go. So Chris Hedges was on Current Affairs. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with this show, but he had an interview, and the discussion is war zones and prisons, and he's comparing the two. And I want you to listen to this part of the conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and play this for you. Let's get this started. So here we go.
I think people don't necessarily realize just how horrific some of the conditions in American prisons are. I mean, they vary from place to place, but you describe some things in the book, like, you know, people being kept in solitary confinement who their toilets don't flush intentionally, and they're kept there with their own waste for days at a time. I mean, this is just, it's just the most horrific condition you could imagine plunging a human being into and keeping them there. And that's going on all the time, every day, all around the country that we inhabit.
Right, to a certain segment of the population.
Right.
Not to you and me. But if you're poor, that's and especially if you're Black, that is, a common experience to you, or probably someone you know, and probably someone in your family.
I want to jump in here for just a second. I'm so glad that he mentioned that, because that's very important for people to know. You notice Chris Hedges said, well, not for people like you and me, but more so for people who are poor, and especially for people who are Black. And this is one of the things that I've brought up a couple of times on this show. People that have money that get into legal situations, if you have the money to get you out of that situation, you're less likely to spend time in prison. Look around. We see it happen with celebrities often. Now, there are some exceptions. For example, R. Kelly is an exception. That's the most recent one I can think of at the moment, actually. But there are some exceptions here and there. But usually with the exceptions, there's so much evidence that they have no choice but to do the right thing. Most of the time, people who are wealthy that have the money, they can prevent serving time, or they'll do very little time, or they'll do some type of community service. And this has happened for a long time in this country. And that's why I always say it's not really a justice system. It's an injustice system. And the system benefits people who are wealthy, most of the time, people who are white, and also people who have the resources and the means to get around that system. And if you do not have that, you'll end up like what Chris Hedges was talking about. Awkward was on this show a while back, and Awkward was mentioning that some of the prisoners that he would go and visit, because Awkward also does this, he's a part of 10 Demands, and he talks to prisoners as well. He said that some of the people that are in prison, they're not even necessarily guilty. They're sitting there because they can't place bail. And so even when we talk about bail with the criminal justice system, again, that goes back to having economic means. That goes back to the people who are wealthy versus the people who are poor. And people who are poor, like Chris Hedges was just talking about, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be harder for them to come up with the bail money. So they'll just be sitting there waiting trial because they don't have the bail money to get out. That's also part of the reason why some of the prisons and jails are overcrowded. I'm going to go back into the video.
The scene you describe is one of my students, Steph, who I just will, as an aside, gets out, graduates summa cum laude from Rutgers. It's a Rutgers program. It's a great program, NJ STEP, in that if they have a 3.1 average, they can actually get out and matriculate to Rutgers. Some of them finish their degree in the prison, but they can actually go to the campus. So he sold a clandestine cell phone by a guard. There's all sorts of corruption, that's how drugs usually get into a prison, or any kind of contraband. And he's caught with it, and he's sent into solitary confinement for a year for a cell phone, which has left lasting psychological scars. And he's put in one of these cells where there is no toilet. It's a hole in the wall, and the feces and urine is collected every few days. So the stench just permeates the entire tier. There are actually cells in the prison in Trenton, New Jersey, that were former horse stalls. But the prison's quite old. And again, they have there's no toilet. There's no running water. And part of the things they will do when they put you, after there's an altercation or they're attempting to investigate something that's happened in the prison, they'll move you to what they call the hole while you're waiting to determine whether or not you've committed this infraction, and you'll go into solitary. And
I want to chime in here for just a second. Let's talk about solitary confinement, which I feel is one of the most inhumane things that can be done to a person, whether you're a prisoner or not. Solitary confinement. Imagine being trapped inside of a room, a tiny room, and depending on what the type of prison it is, it could be a small room or it could just be what looks like a dungeon. Okay, if you've seen them, you have no sunlight most of the time, no window. You're in complete darkness most of the time. There may not be a light, nothing in there, but maybe just a toilet, or if there's even that. He just told you some of these places don't even have that. You have no interaction with people. Someone slides you your food through a little slot in the door. I want everybody to think about what happened when the pandemic first hit. For those of us that lived in states that locked down, I'm one of them. Massachusetts shut completely down. I remember the first week I was okay. When we went into the second and the third week and we were shut down for a while, I started to get a little stir crazy, started to get a little cabin fever. Not being able to see people, not being able to have any type of interaction, especially for people who are extroverts, it was painful. It's a painful experience. It can cause psychological issues. Yes, Juliet is right. It will break your mind. Absolutely. Absolutely. Imagine not being able to communicate with anybody, not being able to see anyone. You're just stuck in a hole by yourself. I don't think that solitary confinement should be allowed. I never did. I don't agree with it. Because the point of the prison system is supposed to rehabilitate people. I don't feel the prison system that we have in the United States actually does that. Now, there are prison systems in this world that do. I was watching a documentary, I think this was about a year ago. Norway. They were showing a prison in Norway that honestly looked like an apartment complex. The prisoners had their own rooms. There were no cells. These little rooms were kind of like a dorm room that you have in college. They had a key to their dorm room. They can come and go as they please. And the difference was they actually rehabilitate the prisoners. I have to find that documentary, you guys. I can't remember the name of it. I'll have to ask my husband because I think he was the one that actually found it. But the freedom that they had. And the reporter who was interviewing the prisoners was asking them, like, so they just trust that you guys will do what you're supposed to do? They just trust that you're not going to try to violate any rules. You're not going to try to hurt anyone. You're not going to try to escape. And one of the prisoners said, well, no, why would we do that? The whole point is rehabilitation. And you could see the difference with the prisoners in Norway, that they were actually being rehabilitated. That was the big difference. That doesn't happen in the system that we have in the United States. It really does not. The system we have here is meant to break you. And I don't feel you get rehabilitation that way. I'm going to go back into the video.
They can put you in what they call a dry cell, which means there's no water. They will use sensory deprivation, constant light, constant cold, constant heat to break you down. This is normal practice within American prisons. And then at its cruder form, and I actually, for the New York Times, went down and did a story about the parish jail in New Orleans, where the guards were organizing gladiatorial combat for the people in the jail. And jails are actually worse than prison. A lot of my students just want to get out of the county jail any way possible. There's no program. They're locked in there 23, 24 hours a day. The conditions, it's kind of a relief sometimes to get into a prison. But they were giving prisoners, this was in New Orleans, garbage can lids and mop handles and making them attack each other in kind of battalions. And so, yeah, the savagery that takes place within the prison system. 80,000 of our citizens, as I speak, are in solitary confinement. And 6 days is what my students say of after solitary, you begin to start to go crazy. And a lot of people break down, which is kind of the purpose. And then what they do is they drug you up. They give you psychotropic drugs, and you're just into zombies. I mean, it's you sleep all day, your hands shake, you shuffle down the hall. 25% of the people, because we don't have a healthcare system that deals adequately with mental health issues for the poor, 25% of the prison system have severe mental health issues, and they don't get therapy, they don't get treatment. They're re-traumatized and drugged up.
Yeah. There's, the
I do want to say something about that too. That definitely does something to someone's mental state as well. The fact that they would even have prisoners fight each other on purpose. They are treating them like animals. That's not a part of rehabilitation. And this is also the reason why some prisoners, when they do get out, they end up right back in prison because they really have not been rehabilitated. If you've been in prison for 15 years and you're set free and you go back into society, the world that you knew has changed. Imagine going into prison before social media. You come out, you don't know what is a tick to a talk. You don't know what Twitter really is. And that's how a lot of people communicate today. It's like you have to readjust your mind to adapt to a new society that has been here all this time, but you didn't know about it because you've been locked away for 15 years. You have to do that. And on top of that, you have to find a job. And that's a hard part because a lot of companies don't want to hire someone that has a record. So what happens? This is how someone who may have been a drug dealer becomes a repeat offender. You go back out into the world, you can't find a job, but you got to make money so that you can eat, so that you can live, so you can have a place to stay. What happens? People go right back out on the street and start selling. Get caught again, right back in the system. When you have a record in this country, you are a target for law enforcement. It'll be really difficult, very difficult for you. And then on top of that, if you're not given the skills that you need to succeed when you come back into the real world, who's going to hire you with that? How are you going to get a job in the real world if you went to jail before social media started? You don't know how to use these applications. You're not tech savvy. What are you going to do? So this is the biggest problem I have with our criminal justice system. They don't actually rehabilitate anybody. They're not teaching people how to survive when they get out. Henry said, I had a customer I was showing how to use a smartphone. He had just got out of 18 years of prison. Really felt for this guy. See what I mean? It's a totally different world. I'm going to go to some of the comments and I'm going to go back into the video. Sebastian said, what's truly an insult to injury is that despite legalization, people are still in prison for drug-related offenses. Well said, Sebastian, and that's a problem in my state, 100%. That is something that I have contacted Governor Baker about multiple times. The fact that they have legalized marijuana here in Massachusetts, it's been legal for a couple of years, and we have dispensaries here, and they continue to grow in the state, and you haven't done anything about the people who are still in prison here that have been criminalized for marijuana. Those people should be set free. It's kind of like this double standard that I don't approve of. If you can open up a shop and you can sell it, then the people who went to prison for it should be let go. Let them go. Let them go. Quaker Anarchist said, I lived in Nepal and lived with entire people who live in honesty and trust. Just honesty and trust. Norwegian immigrants had the same orientation, thus dumb blonde because they didn't orient to take advantage. Interesting. Franny says the US prison system amounts to modern day enslavement of Black people. Bingo. Delthea says when your morality comes from a belief in an eternal threat of hell for transgressions, you don't rehabilitate people, you rebuke them. That's a good point. Thank you so much for the super chat, Donnie. Lee, tell her about Zeitgeist Movement. She should interview Peter Joseph. You're like the third person to tell me that. I need to write that down so I don't forget, because people mention names to me and sometimes I forget. Thank you so much for the super chat. Harry said the US has just 4% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. Thank you so much for that, Harry. We tend to have harsher punishment here in the United States when you compare us to some of the other, not all the countries, but some of the other countries. And I've always said this before, the fact that people were in prison for weed is kind of insane when you think about it now. Joe Biden's crime bill, of course, didn't help with this. Didn't help at all. It is a for-profit system. So I'm going to go back into the video. Oh, I don't know where it went. Okay, thanks, Eric. Add it to the stream. All right, so let me go back into this. There's another question he asked them. So listen to this.
The good thing is that in recent years, partially because of Michelle Alexander's work, which you mentioned in the book that you teach to your students, there's been a great deal more attention to the problem of mass incarceration. But it is still the case that a lot of it is discussed in ways that are statistical or abstract. We hear the words solitary confinement, we hear mass incarceration, we hear the numbers on how many people America has locked away in its prisons. But the visceral first-person reality of life in an American prison is, I think that, one of the services that your book does, it really opens this institution up for inspection. And you've got scenes in here that I'm never going to forget. I mean, the whole thing with the communication through the toilet bowl phone that you describe at some length. I mean, when you actually start hearing about what life is actually really like, and how people improvise, how ordinary people improvise under incredibly trying conditions of deprivation, you really begin to empathize more.
Yeah, well, that's why I wrote it, and I think there are some very good books on the carceral system. But you're right, and Michelle Alexander writes more about the legal. I think it's a great book, but it's more about the breakdown of the legal system, mm-hmm. where these people railroaded into the prison system without getting any kind of adequate judicial representation. And then we also have to acknowledge, courtesy of Bill Clinton and Joe Biden, that sentences are disproportionate to what they are anywhere else in the world. I always tell my students, I ask them, guess how many years Gabriel Princip got for assassinating the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne and his wife, Sophie. 20. I got people who are serving life and they've never been charged with a violent crime. So the sentences themselves are so draconian. I mean, I have one student, brilliant student, he was in for, I think, 26 years. He gets out, and because they've just turned them into warehouses, they're not getting any training. The college programs is not funded by the state; it's funded by foundations, and it's driven out of it's based at Rutgers. So he gets out; he has no vocational skills. His partner gets pregnant. They have a child that is born premature at 23 months. He's on oxygen.
Did you hear what he just said? He said he gets out of prison and he has no vocational skills. This is what I was talking about. Like, they don't really give them the skills that they need when they're in prison, so that when they get out of prison, they can lead a productive lifestyle. They'll be ready for the job market. They don't do that.
Oxygen 24 hours a day. He doesn't have any money. He can't pay the medical bills. And so he starts to sell drugs. and he's
See?
picked up, and I went up to Goshen, New York, to sit through his sentencing, and he's given 2.5 years, leaving the mother, alone with the child. And his lawyer, I met with his lawyer beforehand, and he said, "Oh, well, I read he was in a robbery. He didn't kill anyone. He was in a robbery. I read what he was in prison for in New Jersey. In New York State, he would have gotten 3 or 4 years." So it's also this disparity. There's no rhyme or reason to the sentences. And then of course you've got the 3 strikes you're out laws. Kevin Sharp, who's now Leonard Peltier's lawyer, was a federal judge. He kind of quit because he said, "I'm sending people to life for prison who shouldn't go for life." The whole system, they say the system doesn't work. Unfortunately, the system works exactly as it is designed to work. And it's now become a multi-billion-dollar a year industry, not because of private prisons. There are private prisons. ICE uses a lot of them. But because everything in the prison has become privatized. The food service, Aramark, and you have all cases of food poisoning in the Florida prison.
Your description of that, of some of the food.
Okay. So that's what I wanted to show you from that interview, because it's a longer interview. Definitely check out the whole interview. It's on YouTube. The channel is called Current Affairs. And I just know that he has a point when he says the system is working exactly the way it was designed to work. And this is another thing that Joe Biden could have done to redeem his past. He could have come forward and said, "You know what? We're going to put an end to the private prison system. We're going to cut that out. You know what? We're going to decriminalize marijuana in this country." But Joe Biden's not going to do that because he knows how his bread is buttered, and he wants them to continue to butter his bread. He knows exactly who he serves and what he stands for. And it does not include the American people. And I, for one, think that everybody deserves a second chance. And if you think about some of the messages that came from the Black Panthers, if you think about some of the speeches that Fred Hampton gave, you're supposed to have this type of redemption. Like, people should be able to be redeemed, right? There's supposed to be transformative justice. And what I see with our prison system, I don't feel like there is transformative justice, because when you get out, for those who do get out of prison, they're still shunned in society and they're prevented from actually living a productive lifestyle, whether they were in prison for weed or they were in prison for burglary. And that's what I want everyone to understand, because regardless of the crime, if you've been in for, especially you've been in for a couple years, everybody got to check that box on their job application, whether or not they have served time, especially if it's federal. And so you already have a feat against you as soon as you get out. You could be ready to change your whole life and start anew, but you already have doors slammed in your face because of the past. If you served your time, you served your time, but it goes along with you throughout life. That's the problem. People will always look at you differently. People will always treat you differently. There are some companies that will not want to hire you. In fact, probably a lot of them would not want to hire you. Now, there are some that do take in ex-inmates. Waffle House. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Waffle House. It's like a diner, 24-hour place, jam. It's more popular in the South. But they are known to hire people who just came out of prison. But let's be real, they don't pay much either. So it's really disappointing. And I feel that we do not have transformative justice when I look at our prison system, when I look at our criminal justice system. I feel like once you have that strike, once you have that mark on your record, you are forever treated differently and your life is forever changed. And that's unfortunate. I'm going to go to some of the comments and then I'm going to get to the final story for tonight. I think I may have missed this one. Lee NYC, thanks for the super chat. I encourage all to watch the TV movie The Day After, 1983. Nuclear war is never a safe option, no matter what warmongers say. Thank you so much for that super chat. Captain Obvious says R. Kelly isn't an exception, though. He's been blatant for decades. It's only now catching up with him. That's a good point. That is a good point. Franny says the U.S. prison system amounts to a modern day enslavement of Black people. Well said. Charlotte says the movie was Where to Invade Next, directed by Michael Moore. Yes, yes. I should have known it was a Michael Moore documentary. He showed the good things in other countries we should adopt. Thank you for that, Charlotte. I forgot the name of it. Thank you for the super chat, Delthea Simmons. Your environment triggered, allowed, and promoted criminal behavior. So now let's put you back in that environment and demand you do better and then wonder why you don't. Boom. Bingo. Bingo. Thank you for the super chat. I'm Sweet Leaf says, I have a friend doing life federally for drugs on a system created that uses points to determine just judgment. He added up as a habitual, no weapons, no other crimes life. It's so sad. It's so sad. Lucky Burrito says, Namaste, Sabby. What's going on, Lucky Burrito? Delthea said, I don't think it's anybody's business if you serve time. You paid that debt. You don't keep paying for a Big Mac you ate 2 weeks ago. I like that quote, Delthea. I like that saying. That's a good point. Very good point. I want to get into my final story. Oh, God. Speaking of criminalization, Congress did something that is not going to make DC voters happy at all. Now, if you remember, a couple years ago, DC was one of the cities, just like, Massachusetts, that legalized marijuana. I believe it was small amounts, if I remember correctly, for Washington, D.C. Might have been decriminalized. I forget. But either way, you get the point. Congress, ladies and gentlemen, has decided to override D.C. voters and keeps sales of marijuana illegal in the district. This is a slap in the face. I'm going to connect this to another story that happened last year, and I want you guys to see the connection here. Listen to this. A GOP-backed ban on weed sales in Washington, D.C. was preserved in a sprawling government funding bill passed by Congress on Thursday. Who passed it? Congress. Who? Congress. Just keep that in mind. Despite opposition from advocates who say the provision overrides the will of the district's residents years after they voted to legalize it. This is what I was telling you. This was years ago. This was years ago, man. I remember because we had it on our ballot here in Massachusetts and it passed. It passed. It was around the same time. The Harris rider, a provision barring the legalization of recreational marijuana sales in the nation's capital, named after its chief proponent, Representative Andy Harris, sailed through the Senate late Thursday, a day after passing the House, as part of a larger $1.5 trillion spending omnibus package to fund the government through fiscal year 2022. Gonna make this screen a little bit bigger. Did I make that bigger? I think I did. I don't know what's happening. Did it do it right? Uh-oh, I moved it. Now I messed things up. I really messed up. I hope I didn't mess it up. I didn't mess it up. Okay. Sorry, you guys. I'm looking at two different things. Congressional Democrats had pushed to do away with the provision, opting not to include the rider in the government funding bills unveiled by appropriators in both chambers last year. But negotiators say the rider was reinstalled in appropriations after sharp opposition from Republicans. We don't like the fact it's there, but it was a choice between providing DC and the American people with funding for their big priorities and still having them and not having them. That's coming from Senator Chris Van Hollen. By the way, Senator Chris Van Hollen is awful. He's awful. I have family in Maryland. I could tell you some stories. Chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Financial Services and General Government. Now, he said that Republicans were the ones who insisted they were ready to shut down the government. That's coming from Van Hollen. Harris fought for the rider back in 2014, the same year nearly 2/3 of DC voters voted to legalize marijuana for adult use in a ballot initiative. Oh, this gets me fired up. It was a ballot initiative the same way it was here in Massachusetts. This really gets me fired up because the people, this is why I'm telling you guys about the voting. The people said, this is what we want. It passed. And just like that, they can come back and overturn it. Now, some of this goes into the fact that DC does not have statehood. I know some people are split about that. Some people are just like, they don't want DC to have statehood. Some people do. But I wanted to drive this home to you. Do you see what happens when you don't have statehood and DC does not have it? So Congress was able to just come in and say, you know what? We're going to gut this. We're going to go back to the way it was. You're not going to have that legal here anymore. So you know what that means? That means that police officers can go back to arresting people for marijuana in DC. The prison system just feeding into the private prison system. Let's go back into the article. It goes on to say Congress has since blocked the district from adhering to the will of the voters in each annual spending package, even as the issue appears to have fallen through the cracks in spending negotiations, with a number of members saying this week they were either not following the status of the rider or unaware of its existence. In remarks to The Hill last week, Harris voiced strong opposition to the prospect of the rider not being included in the package. At the time, he said he didn't know if it would be in the final bill because he hadn't been following it. That's not good news. It's a shame for the citizens of DC. I mean, there's more and more evidence that recreational marijuana is not a good idea. Again, this is coming from Harris, who is also the top Republican on the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, Rural Development, Food, and Drug Administration. Well, what do you know? While district residents are allowed to grow and consume their own, they cannot buy or sell it under the Harris rider. Marijuana businesses use a loophole in the law to gift weed to customers while bundling it with another product or service, creating a gray market that DC cannot tax or regulate. The rider's inclusions dealt a crushing blow to legalization advocates who saw its removal as one of the most achievable wins on legalizing marijuana that Democrats could secure. Some advocates believed that Republicans wouldn't draw a red line over the issue, as 18 states have legalized recreational weed and GOP voters' support for legalization has grown significantly since 2014. And this is something that I want to bring up to you guys. I want to point out to you. Friday night on Call-In, I was talking to callers about you need to talk to people on the other side. Start with the issues that you agree on first. Most conservatives that I have spoken to agree that marijuana should be legal. 18 states have legalized it, you guys. DC has to be different. They have to come back in and change it. This really doesn't make any sense. It really does not. I'll go back into the article and then there's something else I want to tell you about what I want to connect this to. I'm surprised and deeply disappointed by the House and the Senate's inability to negotiate on behalf of Washingtonians, especially on one of the most bipartisan issues in the country. See, it's bipartisan. Advocates pointed to a November Gallup poll showing that a record of 68% of respondents support legalizing marijuana nationally, including 83% of Democrats, 71% of independents, and 50% of Republicans. And with those numbers, Joe Biden still refuses to decriminalize it federally. Because you see, when the voters come together for bipartisanship, they don't want that. But it's okay for the politicians in DC to come together for bipartisanship. Just not the American people. Those of us that actually go and vote. Those of us that put them in office that our tax dollars pay for. Now I want to make a connection here. Last year, there was a piece of legislation that went through the House. And that legislation was to increase funding to the Capitol Police in DC. And as we remember, some of the members of the squad did not vote the way that they should have for that, which is unfortunate. And they actually could have made a difference with the outcome of that bill. And it passed. So they are giving more money to Capitol Police. DC Police. Let's make the connection here. Let's take back the legalization for marijuana, even though the voters here voted for it in the past. Go back to last year. Let's give more money to Capitol Police. Fast forward to 2022. Let's take back the legalization of marijuana. Sorry, I'm congested. So, you guys see the connection? Because one of the things that I say to people, Nick talks about this over RBN as well. If you believe that marijuana should be legal or decriminalized, or if you believe that hell, all drugs should be decriminalized or should be legal, then why do you need to give the police more money? When you know that police officers, a lot of the arrests, I have to look up the percentage, I forget this number. A lot of the arrests are drug related. Remember the war on drugs. So if you think that all drugs should be decriminalized, by the way, this is a talking point that Breaking Points and Secular Talk agree that drugs should be decriminalized. But then they'll come back and tell you they're against defunding the police. That doesn't make any sense. I want to make sure everybody gets that and understands that. So that's what they did. Gave the Capitol Police more money. Then Congress came in and overrode the marijuana legalization in DC. Now, it could just be a coincidence, but I just wanted to make sure people see the connection. I'm going to go to some of the comments. Bryce Smith said Kamala Harris approves. Of course, right? Cop Mala. Franny says, and what color people will they arrest? Exactly. Exactly. Whose neighborhoods are they going to target? Lucky Burrito said plants should not be illegal. Come on, this is insanity. How do you come in and overturn something that the people voted on, that passed? Desert Mantis says Julian was denied appeal in UK Supreme Court. Yeah, I heard that right before I went live. I'm not surprised though. I'm not surprised. It's unfortunate. It really is. Bill Bradley said, but the terms decriminalized and legal are not interchangeable. They mean different things. That's true. Decriminalized should be the bare minimum. But hell, they don't even want to do that. They still want to lock people up for it. That's why. Come on. And I'm willing to bet some of those Republican congressmen and women that chose to vote in such a way to make this illegal again, I'm willing to bet some of them smoked weed in college. Come on now. Come on. Let's get with it. Going back to the 70s, 80s, come on, 90s. Just a point. I'll take those comments on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you so much. Thanks for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Lee, are you in a... Oh, yeah, I read that one already. Sorry. Sab, miss the nearly your show was on a Zoom with Invest in New York, a chapter from New York PAN that works on trying to push tax hikes on Wall Street, the wealthy and corporation. Hochul is Cuomo in every way except he is not an a-hole and not a bully. So we still got work to do. She is real estate, Wall Street, and big money funded. Doesn't surprise me. Regarding Hochul last message, I said that was meant to say she, typo. It's a just us system, Sabs. Sab, are any of your viewers from New York State? NYC, maybe? Any of you guys from New York? Shout out in the chat. If so, they already know the right is fighting hard to repeal bail reform in New York State. Every single street corner crime that is happening in New York City, they tie it to bail reform. The bail reform law came about because of what happened to Khalif Browder. I know that story. That's a really sad story. Sab, I saw that documentary. One of the prisoners was complaining about not getting their Xbox. Wow. Yes. I remember that. How much you want to bet those prisons are financed by the government removing the profit incentive from sending us to prison? Going into prison before social media, Sab. What about in 1994 when the internet took off? May I suggest to your viewers to watch Valley of the Boom? It's about the birth of Info Age 90s. Although I appreciate him bringing on Chris, this dude was going to let his company become a worker co-op. And then when Nate, the boss, saw his power beginning to disappear and that he'd have to share equal power, he ended up firing all his employees. No, for me with that guy. HLM did a segment on it. Oh, wow. I didn't know that. And thanks for this tip as well. GOP will never give DC statehood due to it would add 2 Dem Senate seats. If Dems really believed in democracy, they just tell Maryland to reabsorb the city of DC into their state. But Dems actually tell Maryland, you bet not reabsorb them. We need an edge in the Senate. This is why we need to abolish political parties. If we did DC and Puerto Rico, would have had statehood decades ago, since there'd be no party who'd benefit. That's a good point. Thank you so much for that, Roger. That is a really good point. Eric, we can skip the shout out to Deha. Brooklyn in the house. Is Brooklyn in the house? Is Bronx in the house? How many you in the house? Sorry. 90s. David said the Bronx. Whoop, 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 whoop. Boogie down Bronx. Franny said used to live here. Awesome. I don't need the tweet that I had, Eric, because Afeni, I did see right before I went live, Afeni got the money needed for her tire. So Peace Dove says, Sabby and Lucky, please make this a topic to advocate for. Stop the federal seizures of private properties. Federally legalize cannabis now. That should be something that I don't want to say everybody, but that should be something that if you're really trying to win, you should run on. I'm sorry, and I don't even smoke, but just saying. Okay, guys. All right, I got it right. Whoop, 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 whoop. All right, guys, it's coming along to 8:30 now. Definitely go check out the Nick and CJ show on RBN. They should be live now. I'm about to head out because Brooklyn's in the house. It's Brooklyn in the house. It's Bronx in the house. Charlotte, are you in the house? Japan, are you in the house? Have a good night. Keep up the fight.